Okay, so I think we mentioned towards the end of you know, get big money out of politics, realistic goal or catchy phrase. So you can go check out that recording too. Um, and I mentioned that actually there exists a very large leftist argument for union busting. And I related it to a recording we made like months ago that I think was up, that will be uploaded like right before this one, about like positive rights and that, and why I don't think they're actual rights, they're privileges, or I'll at least say they're things we can attempt to provide for as many people as possible in our modern industrial society, but I don't think they're rights. But I'll give a pretext for context, though, so you don't have to go listen to that whole thing. Positive rights often require the violation of others' rights to fulfill. For example, others are required to pay for health care of the public or to provide them housing. And this immediately takes the form of higher taxes, but can take on more extreme forms as the governing system progresses. For example, seizure of private property may be viewed as justified if a new housing block must be constructed and you own an acre of undeveloped land that the structure can be built on. Another example is the right to pursuit of happiness. If more workers are needed in food commissaries, it may be viewed as justified to force somebody to work in the commissary. Or similarly, if there were to be a shortage of doctors, it may be viewed as justified to force high-achieving high school graduates to pursue medical careers. And actually, we have seen this in action in China, so it's not unrealistic. There's another one, like if sex is viewed as a positive right, it may be seen as justified to force somebody into sex work to fulfill others' right to sex. On a more extreme example, that's a more extreme example. Or it may be viewed as acceptable to take away a sex worker's right to bodily autonomy and deny them the right to refuse consent. Like, nope, you're required to pleasure this client. On a less tangible plane, we'll see the censorship of free speech as viewed as justified to fulfill others' alleged positive rights to acceptance. So these are examples of like individual rights being violated to fulfill others' positive rights. There's basic pretext of, kind of the gist of that previous recording. So leftism believes in positive rights. Positive rights are rights which others are obligated to provide for the individual, often argued to be food, water, housing, healthcare, sometimes sex. I've definitely seen my fair share of Twitteroids claim sex is a human right, and they say it, implying positive right. Twitteroids and Reddit tards tend to get some really interesting views on preventing inceldom. That's like actually a bunch of mini Hitlers, but that's a whole nother topic. Even they'll argue intangible things such as acceptance as a positive rights. But the problem with positive rights is that the fulfillment of these rights will often clash with the positive rights of others. And I think for this reason, this is the reason that violence is the inherent conclusion of leftist policies. And one of the things I said in that old recording is like healthcare is often viewed as a human right, a positive right by leftists, meaning healthcare must be provided to people. But healthcare, as many will agree, is also a field that requires specialized and highly educated labor to perform. We can't just pluck the 19-year-old cashier from behind the counter at the convenience store and tell them to go perform an angioplasty. During the COVID-19 pandemic, we watched healthcare workers go on strike in various locales across the country at various times. And while reading news of this, I wondered if healthcare is a positive right that must be provided to the people, by withholding their specialized labor and refusing to work, Are these medical workers denying people their right to health care? There's a really interesting question there. Does well, there's also a positive right, and I think I specifically mentioned this one in that recording of insulin being a human right. One has a right to the receivership of this. But if being that insulin is artificially synthesized, the exact argument applies. What if the workers at the insulin factory go on strike? If food is considered a human right and agricultural workers go on strike, are they denying people their right to food? Does the individuals or collectively the workers' right to organize and demand better pay, breaks, safer job sites, etc., outweigh the people's right to receive the products of their labor? Interestingly enough, for this reason, unions can really only exist under a capitalist system where the individual has a right to put themselves first. If a worker at a pharmaceutical factory feels conditions are unsafe, he has a right to collectively bargain for better conditions and even go on strike and refuse to work as a way of legally leveraging his employer to make things safer. But under a leftist system, if workers in an essential industry are unhappy with working conditions, but the products they produce are seen as a right the public is entitled to, sides will be taken. There will be a government-designated winner and a government-designated loser. And the loser will be told to shut up and get back in line, or they'll be shipped to Siberia. Oh, but under a leftist system, there will be no need for the workers to strike, as they will be completely satisfied, and all of the job sites will be safe, and compensation will be fair. All the, Twitteroids try to argue as if they're reading from a script. I've unironically gotten that, and so in arguments online, it's kind of creepy how it sounds like they're just reading from, a script of pro-union talking points. But, of course, that's exactly what the great leader will be telling the workers as the soldiers point rifles in their faces and lead them back into the factories. Of course. But jokes aside, how will a leftist system prevent any of this? In fact, using a medical device factory as an example, if universal healthcare was implemented, doesn't that cement healthcare as a right and only increase the validity of the argument that striking is denying people their rights? There is also a problem which this logic has a tendency to self-inflate. So we've used medical staff who are directly administering healthcare and workers in factories that make healthcare items. These are very directly related to healthcare. I just lost my place. We've also considered agricultural workers who are directly involved with food production. But the thing is, there are many other jobs and industries that are upstream, but still essential in that they provide the means for positive rights to be fulfilled. For example, it doesn't fulfill people's right to food if the food is harvested, but sitting on a farm in Iowa. Therefore, transportation workers are now part of the supply chain to fulfill the right to food. If housing is a right, construction workers are essential workers. But look around your house. You may see wood, concrete, and metal. So now forestry workers and concrete plant workers are considered essential. Metal is found in everything from building materials to medical devices to the bullets that get put into workers who think it's okay to demand higher pay. So now miners and steel workers are essential. And the list can go on and on. We literally watched during COVID how many people tried to twist the definition of essential workers. Who's essential, who's not. It could be just such a self-expanding definition. So by now we've ended up in the weeds and we're basically talking about full tanky communism.
Well, that was deep. But I wanted to say one thing to that, actually, just real quick. essential workers. People were calling themselves essential workers. At the same time, I think you had a lot of business. Like a perfect example of this are office supply stores like Office Max, Office Depot, Staples. Those aren't essential workers because they sell government documents. Bullshit. Bullshit. Those you can get all that same shit online, or you can get it at Walmart or Amazon, or wherever else. So those companies, let's face it, we know they're on their way out anyway. They were trying to keep the workers going. I mean, go into any like Staples or Office Max or whatever. It's a ghost town. Okay, they only get small blips on the radar during back to school.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so I think that one went both ways. There were plenty of workers calling themselves essential, and there were plenty of businesses calling their workers essential. I think that went both ways.
You know who was the real Chad during the COVID-19 lockdowns of essential businesses? Was marijuana dispensaries.
Ooh.
Something that was completely, you know what? Marijuana is completely optional as a recreational thing. Yet, they've convinced people, they convinced the government that they're essential. People need to smoke pot during the pandemic. And this gets into my entire side rant.
Popular support.
Yeah, and this gets into my entire side rant that I think medicinal marijuana is like pseudoscience at best.
Oh, yeah.
I literally heard radio commercials saying like, recreational marijuana users, do you want a guaranteed supply during these uncertain times? We can get you a medical marijuana card. And I'm like, you know, no legitimate medicine would ever be able to run ads like that. Like, recreational Vicodin users, do you want a guaranteed supply during these uncertain times? You know,
That's a separate issue we can get into.
that's a separate issue, but it just, you know, and you had an entire side of people that were arguing to shut them all down. Oh, except the completely optional marijuana dispensaries. Like, you know what? Marijuana industry, which, by the way, a lot of people forget, the marijuana industry is an industry in the same way everything else is. They're trying to sell you something.
Mm-hmm.
But, you know, like, what a bunch of fucking chads during the lockdowns. Seriously.
They knew how to leverage a situation to get themselves in an advantageous
You
position.
know?
I mean, they, at the same time, undermine people who actually need to access medication. Not just marijuana, but like essential medication, things that contain opioids, for example. Like they undermine those people by doing that, by running ads like that.
Oh, yeah.
But I mean, good for them. Like they got their bag.
They literally said that, and not one person said a peep, and if they did, they were probably, you know, downvoted to oblivion, banned from Twitter, had 100 like Twitteroid bots ready to mobilize to call them a Karen and that. So, you know.
Yeah, called them Martha for saying like, oh yeah, it's like just weed, like get over it.
Cue my okay boomer thing of, yeah, they just probably used it to shut down the conversation before it even happened. Okay boomer, okay Karen. You know?
They're like, they make you seem like oh so uncool, even though, you know, we're just gonna gloss over the fact that, you know, someone smoking weed actually, you know, going back to the earlier point, like does affect other people around them, right? By smoking weed around other people, right? Yeah. This cannot be ignored.
Well, I mean, it's one of those things too where, okay, this totally goes in the weeds. We're coming up with so many side topics, and I know I have this one written down. I think the marijuana industry will be seen as the big tobacco of our generation.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, like,
and vaping too. Yeah.
Well, I think vaping will get all the publicity, but I think the marijuana industry is going to be just as bad. Total side tangent, and I'm not like against it. Like consider it's like tobacco. Like the people that are getting lung cancer from tobacco aren't the people that occasionally enjoyed a fine cigar. You know, you're talking about the pack-a-day smokers for 20 years. Mm-hmm. But I think there's also an interesting thing where it's like socially acceptable to be a stoner that needs to get high every day. And there was a marijuana dispensary around me that has billboards with a like sunglasses wearing raccoon on it.
Yeah, like they make it all cool.
Does that remind you of any character named Joe that was accused of appealing to children?
No. Maybe I'm too young
not
for
familiar,
this. Maybe I'm too young for this.
But
But we're all
Joe Camel, who was accused of appealing to children.
Ooh.
Anyway, so total side rant. We'll have to do that one at a later date, but
So to address your earlier points here, if we want to get back on track, I wrote down 3 things here. We have your first thing there, mentioning positive rights. We have a conflict of 2 rights, essentially. We have the conflict of the right to healthcare, life, and the conflict of the right to personal property, which is, the right to money and fair pay. That's the essential argument there for everything related to healthcare, related to food, those actual essential services. So that's one thing to think about, and then so that brings us to the second point: how can a government manage this? One example is looking at like electric power. It's a very regulated industry. It had its own ups and downs, and that one does have like a government that chooses the winner and loser.
I very much actually agree with high regulations on utilities and railroads, specifically because they are monopolies.
Yeah.
You literally have no choice but to, like in the Chicago area, we buy our electricity from ComEd, and okay, yeah, there's solar panels, Tesla batteries, whatever, but up until very recently, you had no choice but to give money to ComEd. And even then, a lot of those new things are prohibitively expensive for a lot of people. So, side tangent, I do definitely agree with having heavy regulations on utilities.
Yeah, so that's one instance where I was taught in my electrical my renewable electrical engineering class that is how like power is determined. Like the government sets a price for the electricity, and that price. Like like ComEd has to go by that price, right? And it's already built in a profit margin for ComEd. It's already built in like the amount that they should pay their workers. Like
I don't know if it was around here, and I don't know if it's still there, but I think we used to have a citizens utility board, which was kind of the non-governmental oversight, or it was at least like a third party that would obviously just comprised of like people from the community. That seems like a pretty good idea as well.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think. When we go into like, there's a reason why that exists for utilities and why it kind of works today. I don't know if it like totally works. I don't know if every electric utility worker is happy or anything like that. But like I would consider it working in the sense that most of the time we don't think of outages. Ironically, I just experienced an outage like last week, but let's ignore that. Let's ignore that for the purposes of this argument. Like, in a given year, you don't expect your power to just go out for no reason. So I would define that as like an industry that is doing well. Now, whether its workers are doing well, that's a different issue. But I don't know. The journeyman and the electricians that work don't really have too many complaints. I wasn't able to get a job in electrical engineering myself, but I think that's an okay industry, so it kind of works. Now, when we do this with healthcare, it's a little different. And it gets more
complicated. I was just using healthcare as an example, and it works really well because we just came off of COVID where we saw healthcare worker strikes.
Yeah.
And we saw the media going crazy like, oh no, they might go on strike. Who will care for all the COVID patients?
We saw the direct conflict, right, between those essential rights. The right to healthcare that's very critical when someone's almost dead, and the right to the nurses and doctors who are putting their lives at risk, being in front of a new virus that we don't have a cure for yet, to care for these people, not getting paid properly, honestly. Like, they probably weren't getting paid, and that's why they were striking. So we saw those 2 rights in conflict. Now, what should have been done, I think, is that, like, salaries should have gotten raised, and, like, we shouldn't have had this debacle. But, of course, America likes to do its thing and make things very difficult. And it was tough. It was tough for everybody involved, and the nurses probably didn't get all the pay they were entitled to. A lot of people probably died that shouldn't have. And then we go into like Staples.
I mean, I could very easily imagine Twitteroids calling for get back in that hospital,
Yeah.
and get to work.
Like without any regard for like the fact that all the nurses and doctors had to go through some kind of medical training, the doctors even more so, and like they probably weren't getting paid. They still had their own student loans. They themselves were exposing themselves to COVID, right? Like all these things were just kind of casually ignored. Like they had problems too, and the hospital CEOs were working remote. So
Yeah.
like let's not pretend that the corporations are kind of at fault too for this. Now, how does this get into an argument for union busting, though? Are we saying that like?
I think it was the whole point that idea could be used to justify like strike blocking and that. Like, well, you work in an essential industry, you're not allowed to go on strike because what you do is essential.
Right, but there has to be a counterforce. There has to be like, okay, then the government is allocating money because we believe it's essential, right? Like there has to be that counterforce. Otherwise, you're just forcing people. It is just forced labor.
Yeah.
Right, like you're just taking away a right without giving back.
Yeah, I mean, like, in my opinion, you can't make it illegal for someone to strike because, like, at the end of the day, that's the thing. Like, well, am I an at-will employee or not?
Yeah.
Or if I'm a union, it's like, you could start like a union going on strike, but then if they won't let it's like, in the case I mentioned previously, the training room and the rail workers
In East Palestine.
Right? What are they? If they all just like refuse to do anything, like what are you going to do?
Yeah,
Like,
exactly.
what are you going to do? You like get the military out there and like hold them like. No, that's
You
not
can't.
happening.
What you do is you pass a piece.
I mean,
of
I could
legislation.
imagine doing that, but we're also talking like 1950s Soviet Union kind of levels,
Yeah.
which very, very unrealistic.
Yeah, so
I'll
instead
say.
we pass legislation that screws over the little guys.
And keep in mind, if the rail workers did strike, it would only take a day or two before stores are empty, stuff gets all messed up. The supply chain is beyond screwed up. Everyone's going to start noticing it.
I think the one
attention
advantage
instantly.
that the workers would have on their side in that case is the fact that if they do something that strongly affects people, there will be pressure to resolve it quickly. Like, you walk into the store and shelves are empty because your food isn't getting transported. There's going to be pressure to get it resolved quickly, which will likely go in the workers' favor.
Just basically leveraging their power.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the idea of like, okay, now we have Goliath here, but we have a million Davids. So like we don't care about you, Goliath. Like there's actually more of you. So, like we can replace you or something. So let's let the Davids win. Let's raise the wages and give them a fair contract. That might be the resolution. Because you can't force them to work. You really can't.
Speaking of raised wages, garbage men. If it didn't pay good, no one would do it.
Yes,
Yep.
the garbage would just collect.
Oh, yeah.
Accumulate. It does actually pay pretty well compared to what you might think it would pay.
Well, that's
I
exactly
would
it.
hope it would.
If it didn't pay well, who would do it?
Yeah, like just pay a fair wage. Like, is it that difficult? Apparently.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Is that on that? That's it? Yeah.
I guess we can end on that.
Yeah. I mean, it's getting really late. It's like, midnight, so I'm gonna.
That works.
Yeah.
That sex worker thing was like, it reminded me of a clip from Blackish that was like, we just need these government-funded hoes to help like with the problem of like, I don't know.
Yeah. All right. Your next client is gonna be, Bob. Get ready to feel the force of a real man, m'lady. Oh, by the way, you're not allowed to say no to him, or you're gonna go to prison for 5 years. So have fun.
And then the other side is like, if you don't want to have sex with someone who's trans, you're homophobic, right? Like that's the other side.
Well, I'm talking like government for that's starting to get into like the cultural wars, which that's not a focus of this.
Yeah.
But I mean, yeah, but from a rights perspective, can that be forced?
Again, if it's and it's never perfect, but I always just go for the simple like, if it's infringing on someone else's right or right to not do, then, and obviously there's plenty of things where it's not perfect, but you try to get that as close as you can. That's more or less the end game there.
I think that also goes back into like, in modern industrial society, there are some things that just aren't possible. Like, okay, maybe it's not possible to like gather your own firewood or grow your own food simply because, population so big, land's scarce. So, okay, it may not be possible to actually be self-sustaining in this day and age,
Or highly impractical.
or highly impractical. So, there's plenty of nuance there too. Yeah.
Yeah. Last note: white collar workers, y'all need to make unions. Just do it more frequently. Please do it, and stop glorifying Henry Ford. That will be all.
Unions can only exist under a capitalist system.
Exactly. Henry Ford was an anti-Semite.